Okay, so it's 8:01, and I want to again thank so much all the panelists. It was very generous of them. They said yes immediately, and even in one case with a lot of technical problems and things happening in the last minute was Nicole, and she was extremely gracious. So thank you again. And I'm going to start then sharing my screen to show you the video that we prepared. So, closed captioning. So here we go.
Let's go. Woo. Yay, Maria. Hi, I'm Piper Hughley, and I am a visiting assistant professor at Clark Atlanta University. And I am an academic who studies romance scholarship as well as a romance author of historical romance. And currently am working on my first contemporary romance, which will be published next year by Hallmark Publishing. And some of the central questions I've been thinking about have to do with Black male heroes and the possibility of them, or the question of them as being alpha heroes, alpha male heroes. So we know in romance this is a very big thing in terms of male heroes meeting and fulfilling a particular standard of ferocity, of virility, of masculinity, and what I'm really interested in, economically speaking. You don't really see a poor male romance hero, right? And because of societal expectations of Black men not fulfilling at a certain economic level, for instance, I think there's something like, in the United States at least, there's something like 2 Black billionaires. The fact that that doesn't get to cross over into romance is what I'm particularly interested in. In terms of traditional publishing, for instance, we've seen the diminished appearance of Black male heroes who get to have this alpha hero sensibility. A lot of that has had to do with the recent demise of the Kamani romance line, which within one fell swoop eliminated the possibility of every month having usually 4 Black male heroes who were fulfilling that alpha male romance hero. Fortunately, indie publishing has taken up the slack in terms of this, but I still have questions about what these heroes do. Like, for instance, you have had the fact that at one point in time in romance, the larger romance world, it was a no-no to write actors or musicians or sports heroes. All of that got started with the indie publishing world and traditional publishing a la Kamani, where you would have Black quarterback heroes, you would have musicians, R&B singers, for instance, and actors permitting to be heroes because of those were places where Black men succeeded, economically speaking, in the real world. So those are some of the questions that I'm interested in, and I'm looking forward to what everybody else is going to be talking about. Thanks a lot.
I'm an associate professor of history at Bowling Green State University. I'm a 20th century Black diaspora historian, and my work looks at post-World War II Black activism in the US, Caribbean, and England. I'm interested in what I theorize as a politics of care. So I imagine this as the ways in which expressions of love and care for family and community members they are formative projects of Black activist movements in these spaces to push back at societal marginalization, structural racism, and colonial projects. I also imagine activism across the African diaspora as sites of community building itself. So it's important to say that I'm coming at romance scholarship as a new phase of my career, and I'm doing so from my methodological training as a social and cultural historian who is interested in representations of race and racism. I think that I was certainly imagining that my colleagues would be unsupportive of a project that looks at romance novels, but I found that not to be the case. Part of that is because I was already interested in the artistic productions of the Black activists that I study, who are incredibly engaged in fiction writing, poetry, but also music, other forms of art, and other forms of art. And so, at least for me, this was this could be a natural progression, and my colleagues took it in that way. I'm also incredibly lucky that I'm at an institution with a popular culture department, library, and archive. So not only is it a little bit easier for me to do the research that I need to do, but I have access to a community of scholars who are thinking about it from that standpoint to help with my own work. I will say, though, it has been really interesting for me to approach romance scholarship as a complete newbie who has only read romance novels, and I'm also a self-published erotic romance novelist under the pen name Katrina Jackson. So I came from it from those standpoints, but not from the scholarly point. And so it has been interesting to engage romance scholarship and really think about, especially in this moment, what it means for romance and publishing in general to be sort of thinking about diversity. Again, this is not a new project, but to ask questions that I think have been either unasked or unanswered before in the scholarship and in publishing. In particular, I'm interested in sort of pushing past the sort of inclusion narrative that publishing and also academia really loves, right? To sort of have just Black authors or, maybe Black characters, but to really think critically about the quality of that representation, right? Are not all sort of representation is equal, not all representation is revolutionary, and certainly some representation is damaging. And so my own work is sort of thinking about that representation that I think is truly sort of engaging a kind of real liberatory and revolutionary expressions of varied expressions of Black love in historical and contemporary romance novels. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jayashree Gamble, and I'm really happy to be part of this roundtable. My thanks to Maria and Isabel for putting it together. And I'm going to enjoy thinking about the idea of the reasons for romance scholarship, which is the base of this panel. I think the same spectrum of reasons that apply to any line of academic inquiry apply to romance scholarship, because something is interesting aesthetically, because something is interesting politically, because something has been uninteresting by past yardsticks, and the status of those who wielded those yardsticks needs to be re-examined now. My current work is about the relationship between romance and race. So I guess it's an example of how romance scholarship can tackle politically relevant issues that impact the quote-unquote real lived experiences of writers and readers. More specifically, I've been thinking about the portrayal of London in historical romance novels over the last 40 years. Romance London mimics BBC masterpiece versions of London as often as documenting reality. As such, it is a chronotope in Bakhtin's terms as much as it is the real city, a constructed narrative space-time that's only loosely related to factual sociopolitical and economic record, one composed of what scholar Caroline Bressi critiques as an imagined whiteness. Romance fiction's chronotopic vision of London and what it leaves out or whitewashes provides us a lens to understand the current debate in romance about fair racial representation. In mass-market romance novels, especially ones set in 18th and 19th century London, central protagonists have overwhelmingly been white or Anglo characters, and many have defended this as quote-unquote historically accurate. Now, apart from reflecting a poor knowledge of history, partly I think due to a media landscape, including romance novels, that overlooks people of color history in the United Kingdom, this belief is both a symptom and potentially a contributor of continued bigotry and discrimination. It suggests that there are romance readers and writers who prefer a world devoid of people of color, at least in their fiction. Additionally, the British setting in the genre, which is now dominated by American authors who write UK-set novels, is a stand-in for the United States, a sort of Anglo-ancestral homeland to which contemporary America is refracted. As such, the genre's vision of a white UK with a white London at its center cannot be separated from the contemporary racist othering of American people of color citizens as well as of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in the United States and elsewhere. In other words, we cannot overlook how the traditional romance novel representation of the UK as starkly white is implicated in the normalization of racist actions and xenophobia, and the condoning or advocating of racially discriminatory policies in the United States and the UK and other countries. But while romance novels reflect and potentially amplify such existing problematic beliefs, they can also work to counter them in service of lesser known or non-populist truths and of social justice. My current work reviews London-set Victorian novels that include people of color protagonists and thus studies the slice of the genre's metamorphosis toward diversity through the single variable of this global city or metropole. It also uses historical records to show how this diversity is more historically accurate than traditional historical romance. To conclude, I do not think romance scholarship needs to be about the moment and its politics in order to justify its own existence. But as you can see, it can function in this particular way.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jodie McAllister. You can read my full bio elsewhere, so let's not talk about me. Let's talk about romance. So specifically, I want to talk about where romance scholarship has been and where we might go next. Speaking broadly, and I should emphasize that this is very broadly, the last 40 years of scholarship on romance has been consumed with one question, summed up neatly in the name of Sally Goad's 2007 edited volume, Empowerment versus Oppression: is the romance genre feminist? Most 1980 scholars were very firm that it was not. So this school of scholarship subscribed to the notion that romance fiction was, as Shiming Teo has put it, the opiate of the misses, governed by a principle described by many second-wave feminists as it starts when you sink into his arms and ends with your arms in his sink. Now, Pamela Regis essentially makes the inverse argument in her 2003 book, A Natural History of the Romance Novel. Rather than being a literature of female oppression, she argues that the romance is a literature of female empowerment and freedom. And it's this line of thinking that characterizes a lot of scholarship on romance today. So recently, for instance, my fellow panelist, Catherine Roach, has argued that the romance genre offers a fantasy antidote to patriarchy. But to arrive at my own thoughts, my own provocations after this quick literature review of romance scholarship, I wondered to what extent this ongoing ideological debate has distracted from other, perhaps more interesting questions we could have been asking about romance fiction, and which are beginning to emerge now. And what I find most exciting about contemporary romance scholarship are the ways in which we're beginning to move away from these approaches, which are what the fan studies scholar Matt Hills calls decisionist approaches, where we try to decide whether something is inherently progressive or not. Now, decisionist approaches are not without merit. The last 40 years of scholarship has been super important, but they can be binaristic, and they can cause us to overlook everything else. And that's what I hope we can talk about a bit today. What have we been overlooking? What other questions can we ask? What new ways of looking can we develop? What complexities can we uncover, both in our objects of study and in our ways of studying them? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Catherine Roach. I work in gender, sexuality, and popular culture studies at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Thank you for this invitation to participate in the roundtable. Look, I even put lipstick on. So for my 3 preliminary remarks, I'm going to throw out 3 ideas spurred by the interesting questions that Maria sent us. 1, an introductory idea. 2, the question, how is scholarly work on popular romance received among writers? I'd like to note that the Romance Writers of America, who have had a rocky year, support scholarly work on romance with their now 15 years of academic research grants. This year's RWA grant competition is about to open. I'm part of the selection committee, and which this year is particularly looking to fund the research of Black academics and other academics of color. I encourage everyone interested to apply, and feel free to ask me any questions about the grant process. Second, then, that leads me to Maria's question about the relevance of romance scholarship. I see popular romance as very much a literature of resistance, of protest. To me, the genre has always felt to be feminist, radical, a obviously woman's space to spin out fantasies about how to achieve selfhood as a woman in a man's world, and including the big problem of how to make sex work. Part of the answer the genre gives is about the politics of pleasure. Serious issues are certainly worked out within the genre and the novels, but from the reader experience, it's largely about a woman getting to read a book that makes her happy. Maria's description of the panel talks about how, quote, romance novels are still considered a guilty pleasure and the academic study of them frivolous. I see the whole romance genre as queer in that way, unruly, not respectable, transgressive, challenging, and undermining literary hierarchies, a romp dedicated to pleasure. So the older I get, the more the politics of respectability loses its appeal. I like the idea of embracing the transgressive potential of things that aren't respectable or ladylike, but that make a woman happy. So that's one vision of the potential, the social justice potential of romance scholarship. A third and last question from Maria's list, what would I like the future of scholarship to be? May I say, one in which conferences are in person. I worry about the future of academia with universities having this rationale that everything can go online with no loss. I want the future of scholarship to be queer with an eye to power and privilege, to flattening hierarchies and asking that question, who gets to have pleasure? I'm interested in diversifying methods of scholarship with approaches like autoethnography and arts-based research. I think more public scholarship is really important to keeping our work relevant and pleasurable. I want playful, fun, accessible, public-facing, clear language scholarship. So, conclusion, why does romance scholarship matter? It has something to do with a vision of love, with diversity as its pulsing heart, pleasure as its breathless feminist climax, and academia itself as our nerdy geek lover, so adorable, but in need of just a little loosening up. Thank you.
In 2007, Diane Shipley wrote an article in The Guardian titled In Defense of Chick Lit. She begins the article by posing the following questions. What is wrong with fiction written by women, for women, and about women? And why do the critics never seem to have read any of the books they profess to hate? I use these questions as a starting point in an elective titled Rereading Romance in Contemporary Women's Fiction. I started teaching romance fiction in 2008 when I was at Stellenbosch University to final year students, and I continued to teach it at my current university, which is Rhodes University. I believe that romance fiction has a space in academia and society. Most of my students have read romance at some point in their life, or have seen their mothers or grandmothers reading romance, but very few of them have thought of romance within an academic context. A good number of students take my class because they think it's an easy option. Mm-hmm. The first task, I ask students to go and read any Mills and Bones, Harlequin, or Silhouette romance, and to write a review for the next class. Writing the review forces them to engage with the course or with the texts differently. When they begin to read the reviews in class, they start to notice that there's a pattern to romance writing. And so I ask the following question. If romance fiction is formulaic, why does it continue to be successful? This opens up the discussion not only to speak about the texts themselves, but also to consider the role of writers, the readers, and publishers. Daniel Pratt describes this pedagogy as a developmental perspective that focuses on developing students' complex and sophisticated ways of thinking within a particular subject. As a teacher, I take the prior knowledge that students have on romance and build on it so that at the end of the course, their ways of thinking and reasoning are far more sophisticated. The aim is not to change how students think, rather it is about using their own knowledge to construct deeper understanding. We begin by interrogating why romance fiction is regarded by many critics as an inferior or lowbrow literature, and yet it continues to appeal to women writers and readers. In spite of being dismissed, we question why it is exceedingly successful. Since we're located in Africa, we read Western Romance fiction alongside African romance and consider the various ways in which women writers in Africa use and subvert the genre. I lead Julian notes that romance in Africa is used to explore more personal experiences, to allow for desire that goes unarticulated, indeed unvoiced in other forms of writing. We question how romance is positioned in relation to feminist ideas and concerns. We interrogate how these narratives open up spaces to negotiate the contradictions and complexities of contemporary feminine subjectivities. By the end, students begin to understand that romance fiction cannot simply be dismissed. There are far more complicated and nuanced ways of understanding what makes this. Look forward to having an honest discussion on the social value of romance in academia and in society. Thank you, and see you next week.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Lynn Van Sloten. And when I've been thinking lately about romance scholarship and why it matters, I've been thinking about two main issues. The first issue is, who are we as scholars? I think early scholarship tends to be seemingly objective with a critical distance and oftentimes an outsider status of romance novels. And I think that is something that has been shifting as more scholars are actually fans of the genre and in some cases writers of the genre. So that changes the way we look at the text in some interesting ways, and I think helps maybe bridge the divide between the fans and the scholars. And a good work that I like to reference that is doing this is Catherine Roach's Happily Ever After. The other thing that she does in this text that I am really interested in is using a kind of feminist methodology where the scholar inserts themselves and their personal experience into the text. And I think that this is really relevant for popular romance scholarship because it is a genre that folks feel really deeply connected to on a personal level. The second issue has to do with who is our audience for our scholarship. Traditional scholarship tends to be primarily written for an audience of fellow scholars. And because of that, we often locate it in places where other scholars can look, right? Access through databases that you need subscriptions to, journals that have a paywall, and expensive university press editions. In addition, they're often written in a kind of a scholarly jargon, which is not accessible by many readers of romance. And I think that's an area where we can really work on shifting to better reach a broader audience. And I already see this happening in some places. I love listening to podcasts and hearing appearances by scholars who are talking with fans about the genre and bringing the scholarly lens to a broader audience. And I think that's a really powerful and important thing that scholarship can do. I think the real value of romance scholarship is providing insight into deep structures and narrative conventions and these sort of literary and historical and social contexts that we can place the genre and the novels in. And that is a framework that we can provide for a wide variety of readers to deepen and enhance their experience of reading romance.
Okay, so again, and some people have been arriving through the video, so welcome to everybody. My name is Maria Ramos-Garcia, and I'm moderating this first panel of the IASPR Digital Forum. IASPR is in the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance. Thank you to our guests, and thank you to all the audience here. I would like to mention a few things before we get started with the discussion. This session is being recorded and it will be shared with a more general audience after the conference. please, those who are not participants, stay in mute. If you want to ask questions, please type them in the chat. And then the subtitles in this video, I'm sorry if they were not complete. I did my best. And if I know that there were a few names that I got wrong. So if the panelists are willing to just put them on the chat, if they get a chance, that would be wonderful. And the biographies, every biography of the presenters, if somebody hasn't got the chance to see it, is in the website for the conference. So without anything else to say on my part, I would like to open to our guests the discussion. Where would you want to start? I mean, there's so much in those preliminary remarks.
Very interesting, all of them.
I thought you guys were starting with questions, or not?
Oh, I already gave you a long list.
Oh, that's true. That is very true.
Well, I can set us off. Actually wanted to hear a little bit more from Lydia, because I think many of us are not as familiar with romance on the African continent. And so I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more, maybe an example of a book that you've used in your classroom, a novel. And when you talk about how there's an articulation of otherwise unarticulated desire, did you mean in general in the Anglospheric romance, or did you mean in other media that your students usually get from other sort of African creatives? Could you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to first thank Maria and Isabel and Eric, who was not here, for all their preparations and for getting this organized. I think I agree with Catherine. I hope the next conference will be a proper conference. It's not a virtual conference, because it's looking forward to meeting most of you in the Canary Islands. Yeah, thank you for that question, Jarashi. First, I want to say, when I speak about African romance, I use that knowing very deliberately, knowing that Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent. So, but we have shared experiences. And the romance that I look at is, most of the publishers appeal to the entire continent. I think that's a different, the difference with African romance. One of the things that I look at African romance through is through the publishers. So yes, there've been a number of publishers, or a few publishers in the English language, because there's romance in English, there's romance in Hausa, which is completely different. There's romance in French, there's romance in Afrikaans. I'm speaking and I'm located right now in South Africa, and there's that romance in Afrikaans. So I'm not concerned, because I don't read Afrikaans, I don't read French, and I don't necessarily read Hausa. So I'm mainly interested in the romance that's written in English. And there are publishing houses on the continent that have been publishing in English. One of the things, though, before I get to the publishing houses, is that African romance is very ethereal. It's there, it comes, it lasts for about 5-6 years, and then it disappears. So it's not as, and that's why it's very difficult to talk about it in the same light as you talk about Mills and Bones or Harlequin, that are established publishing houses. And so when I started my research in African romance, and this was maybe about 10-15 years ago, there was no single publishing house in English. By the time I finished my PhD, there were 3 publishing houses. So which are the publishing houses that I'm talking about? I'll just show, I'll give examples. So in Southern Africa, we had this one that's called Nolly Books. Nolly Books was around for 4 or 5 years, and this one is quite interesting because of the way in which it then speaks to the question you're asking me about how do African romances articulate expressions that are not in other, what I would like to say, literary fiction. So this was Nolly Books, and it's an interesting story, but I won't get to that now. The other one that the other publishing house is Ankara Press. And you can see that from African Romance, you can see how distinctly different these texts are in terms of just the pictures of African Romance. This one is a publisher, is Ankara Press is an imprint of Cassava Republic, which is a Nigerian publishing house. I don't know if most of you know what Ankara is. Ankara is a material, this material that you have in mainly West Africa. West Africans call it Ankara. In East Africa, they call it Kitenge. So it's almost a reclaiming of something that is seen to be African. So this is Ankara Press, that is a Nigerian, that comes out of Nigeria. And then you have this one, which is Sapphire Press. And Sapphire Press is an imprint of Kwela Press, which is a South African imprint. So there is no one book that I can teach, but there are publishers. I talk about the publishers, and because we all know that from the romance is formulaic, students are allowed to go and asked to go and find one of these books or all of these books and read them and compare what the publishers are doing with the genre. So that's the one thing. In terms of the way in which what Eileen Julian is talking about is the way in which it gets to women writers. And the other thing is, in Africa, it's not only women writers, it's also male writers, and they write under their own names if they don't want to use a pseudonym. But the other thing that is important is that the way in which they articulate women's desires and women's concerns in the romance, which you don't necessarily get when you're talking about, when you look at literary fiction. And when I talk about literary fiction in Africa, I'm also talking a lot about the canon. And with African and the situation in which Africa is, where you talk about issues of colonialism and post-colonialism, those seem to be the issues that need to be discussed, as opposed to talking about women's writing. And one of the authors, canonic authors from Ghana, is called Ama Ata Aidu, and she wrote for a long time serious novels, and somebody asked her, why don't you write about love? And she said, how can I write about love when there are more serious things to write about? And years later, she wrote a book, she collected a story, she edited a collection of story, or she wrote a story about love and changes. It's called Changes, a love story. And the first thing she says, writing this book has been an eating of words, because I've come to realize that love is something important that you can talk about. And later on, she edited a collection of love stories. So those are the kinds of things I think Eileen Julian is talking about. And those are the kinds of things that we try to problematize and interrogate when we're talking about romance, looking at romance imprints in Africa. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I've rambled a bit.
You did. That was really fruitful. Thank you so much. I have lots to look up.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question, kind of bouncing off that? Are there self-publishing romance communities much in any specific countries in Africa, or more broadly? I'm thinking we've got wonderful models of self-publishing in places like the Philippines. I can see some romance class members here today. Are some of those self-publishing sort of communal experiences beginning to emerge, do you think?
Yes, so I haven't, I mentioned the Hausa's love stories, which are called the Soyaya love stories. And it's a completely different, I will start there and move on. The Soyaya love stories are written by Hausa women, and they are mainly situated in the north of Nigeria, and it's a very Islamic state, place where they live. And these women handwrite. They handwrite their stories, all these stories, and then and then they read their stories off on radio. So someone was talking about podcasts, but they have slots on the radio where they read the story, or they have places where they exchange these stories that they read. So that's a self-publishing that kind of is about literally publishing. When we can move from that, not so much to romance imprints. So I think I try and make a distinction between romance imprints and just romance novel. And there is self-publishing happening at the moment, especially in Southern Africa, that started with blogging. So somebody starts off with a blog and continues with this blog and gets a lot of the one person is called Mike Maputo. Again, that's where it's different, where it's a male writer. It was a male writer who started off with a blog called The Diary of a Zulu Girl. And he got a lot of input from his audience, and eventually the audience said to him, like, sometimes we don't have access to the internet. I mean, I came in late because we had power cuts, and the power came in just before we started. Times we're not near internet, we don't have Wi-Fi. So why don't you then produce this diary as a book and we'll buy it? And that's what he did. And then now he has a couple of books. And what has happened with that, in a way, there's been an offspring where other people have started either the diary of a taxi driver, the diary of this. So it spun off its own kind of genre, so to speak. So there's that. And where it starts off as a blog, it starts off on an online platform and then goes on, becomes a published book. But the second example is one, she's called Hlomu Busani. She wrote, Dudu Butsani. She wrote a book called Hlomu. And it was just like she wrote a couple of chapters and gave the chapters to her friends. And her friends were like, this is quite good. Why don't you write it? Why don't you publish it? And she then started her own self-publishing house. And at the moment in South Africa, she sells more books than J.M. Coetzee. And for those of you who know J.M. Coetzee, he's a Nobel Prize winner and 2 times. She sells more books than he does. And when you look at it in terms of aesthetics, and somebody was talking about aesthetics, there's that disjuncture between yes, J.M. Coetzee is a Nobel Prize winner, and I don't think Dudu will ever be. But then why is it that why are her books selling? So there is a bit of self-publishing, not as imprints, but a different kind, and it's mainly about the love story. It surrounds this love story, but it's not a formula. It's not. They don't necessarily follow the formula of that we're all accustomed to.
There's also Love Africa Press, right? So they are self-published, and they primarily publish authors in Africa, but they also do the diaspora. And that's a community of writers.
Oh, awesome. That's so interesting.
Okay, there's silence again. This is so fascinating. But my experience with romance scholarship is that it's hidden even within academia, that you are not supposed to study romance. You can study manga, you can study comics, but not romance novels, in spite of the fact that they sell so much and they are such an important part of the publishing market. So I don't know why do you think that is, or what could be done about it?
Excuse me, Maria. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but there's a question, a specific question for Linda from Sandra. Sandra, do you think I should, before we start with
maybe we should
next
finish
point?
this first and then continue with my question. Sure.
Yeah, because it's a specific question for Linda. And the question is, do you think African publishers often use the label, she includes some examples of African chick leads, okay? And she says, I noticed that some examples, some publishers, for example, Nolly Books and Sapphire, also use the label chick leads. The question is, do you think African publishers often use the label synonymously, chick lead, synonymous with romance? Is it more a marketing strategy, or is it also strongly linked to the characters and the plots? This is the question for Linda.
I mean, I don't know if Sandra can see me. I mean, this is the Nolly book, and clearly on the book itself, it says romance. It's a Nolly book, romance. So they use it as romance. I do think that when you read the text, especially Nolly books, there is a bit of I call it a hybrid between romance and chick lit. But it doesn't also always necessarily follow the format of chick lit, because most of chick lit tends to, and I think Jessica can speak to this more because I've used her articles in my own research, is more about the 30-something women, whereas this is aimed mainly at 18 to 24 year olds. So probably the publishers are using it also as a marketing strategy. I don't know. I really don't know. But I think the way in which I read it as a hybrid between the two. And I think for me, it also then becomes really a good way of reading romance and reading chick lit, because the course that I do reads romance, begins by looking at romance. And one of the arguments I make is that chick lit comes out of romance in one way. So it's good for my students to then have which is the very formulaic kind of text, and then to go on and look. So I think in my case, I look at the link to characters and plots is my reading of it.
Thank you.
Maybe one of our silent presenters, Piper, Jessica.
Well, I see Courtney's question here, if you don't mind, Isabel. I'd love to hear more about the representation of BIPOC male heroes, where we see them in romance, how they're represented, and historical and societal constructs that contribute to that, which is partly what I do in terms of my work. Some of the things that I've written have been my experiments in this question in terms of how they're represented. Who is Prince Charming for a young Black woman in the Southern United States in 1915? For our international audience, this is a time when Black people in the South were experiencing difficult times and circumstances. Is romance possible underneath of these particular circumstances when people are experiencing difficulty in their outer lives? My answer to that question is yes, most certainly. One of the things I like to point out is that if that didn't happen, we wouldn't be here to tell the tale in regards to the kinds of things that would have happened. So what does Prince Charming look like? He looks like a doctor. He looks like a journalist. He looks like, in My Treasure of Gold, he looks like a numbers kingpin, someone who has great mathematical talent, in 1923 Pittsburgh, but who's not permitted to use that mathematical talent in a way that the larger society would permit him to, in a respectful way, but has to go outside of the law in order to be able to bring up the kind of things that a traditional alpha male would have in terms of that. So there is a great variety, or there are certain societal characteristics that are making impressions upon these male characters of color in terms of that. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why there's this, I think it's a friction that's going on in terms of the inclusion, like what Nicole talks about, the inclusion of these more varied, I think, characters beyond the dukes, beyond the billionaires, right, of male heroes in romance. That there's a friction. Do we let them in? Do we let them out? Do we consider this romance? Do we not consider them romantic? One of my experiments that I went on and took stripes for was having a reformed alcoholic father who had a baby's mama in 1911. I took stripes for that in terms of people calling him pathetic, and the fact that he was awful. And Catherine talked about books that make women happy. It seems that hero, Arlo, reminded too many women of too many realistic circumstances in their own lives, of the difficulties that they've had. And they didn't want to read about that in any kind of way. That was difficult for some women. Some women thought his redemption arc, which was what I featured in that particular novella, gave a lot of happiness or hope in terms of their own lives. But yeah, I think it's an issue in terms of that friction about who gets let in as heroes and who doesn't. I wonder if everything that's going on now with George Floyd would change that. It's going to be interesting to see, I think.
Nicole, I wonder if you could work off of maybe what Piper is saying, because I was listening to your video and I was trying to sort of grasp a little bit whether you were talking about heroes or you're talking about heroines. Like, can you give us a little bit more concrete information on this notion of the politics of care? What kind of Black representation? I think you mentioned activism or activists at some point. So I think maybe that's also maybe a little bit of what Piper ended her answer with. So you want to jump in?
So I'm interested in activism as part of my concrete historical work, which is not about literature. But what came out of that activism was literature, right? So, and that is a sort of tried and true way that of Black expression, and I'm particularly in the UK looking at Caribbean people who are very engaged in literature and art as part of their activism, right? But so that is how I sort of got to romance, but I'm interested in heroes and heroines, which is why I find, and every time Piper talks about it on Twitter, I'm always telling her that I'm interested in this topic, because I think there is something really interesting about the way that in this sort of moment of inclusion, we have seen a diminishing of Black men, right? Because then we have to kind of contend with, at least for me, like what is inclusion, right? Sort of look like, what is the sort of metric for that? And since I'm interested in race and representation, and in particular Black romance, right? There at times, if you're looking at traditional publishing, seems like a finite sort of a finite number of stories, right? Because you have to sort of get rid of all of the sort of interracial romances, right? Which I think are doing something very different in terms of representing Blackness and Black culture. And then you have to contend with sort of what exists, and the loss of Kimani is sort of specific. But even with Kimani, there is, you could argue, I think, a very particular kind of Blackness there, right? So it's not varied. And whether that is class or location or culture, but that is a sort of very particular editorial focus. And when you move to indie or self-published Black romance, there is maybe more variety, but I think you could still argue there is a particular kind of representation of race and class. So I'm really trying to think about, and I'm a historian, so I'm sort of looking first at, historical Black romance. So Jayashri, I'd obviously be interested to hear more of sort of you talk about your work, but I think what I'm interested in is sort of who gets to be included and how do we, or how is their inclusion bartered, right? And I think there is, as I'm developing my own arguments, right, I think there has been a sort of a bartering for the inclusion of Black women that has at various moments allowed for the exclusion of Black men, right? So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask Catherine a question? Hello?
Yeah. Yes, hello.
Yes. Yeah, Catherine, I was quite interested in what you were talking about romance genre as queer and transgressive. Can you just expand on that?
I'm using I'm using the term queer in a wide, expansive sense. So sometimes queer and queer theory refers specifically to LGBTQ approaches, and that's part of what I intend, part of what I'm thinking about, because a lot of my work is about sexuality studies, thinking more broadly about gender and sexual diversity. But the root of the word queer as referring to a process of inquiry, a process of questioning. Sorry, I got to close my door. Sorry, there's loud noise outside. This is an aside, but I noticed also I'm wearing the same shirt now that I'm wearing when I made my video. And I'm thinking that like, during lockdown, I never changed my clothes apparently. So, sometimes I do, just saying. Okay, so to queer for me, and I try to engage my students in this as sort of a larger process of what we're up to at the university, is about asking critical questions, engaging in a process of critical thinking, interrogating fundamental assumptions. So to be queer is to be unruly, to be aggressive. So I'm thinking too about the genre as a traditionally woman-centered space where women engage in writing that sometimes queers these literary hierarchies that we've been talking about of what counts as real literature, what counts as proper writing for a lady to engage in, so that there's something very queer, very unruly, very transgressive in the simple act of a woman writing her story. I loved what Linda was talking about of these women writing by hand, despite the difficulties of entering into the publishing genre, technological difficulties of accessing resources, like that drive to write your story, to share your story with others. There's something very transgressive about that also. So when I'm talking about queer, I'm thinking that in those categories, upending hierarchies, not doing what is considered proper, traditionally acceptable, particularly for women. And I was thinking there about the politics of respectability was a term that I'd pulled in also. Maybe on that point, I wanted to connect with what Nicole was saying too about the politics of care. I picked up on that term and thought that was very interesting. And thinking about, we were all in one way or another talking about politics, I guess, in our introductory videos, how the romance genre is, it's literature, but it's also always politics. So there's always issues of power and privilege in writing the stories and who gets to get published in the traditional gatekeeper of the publishing industry that's been upended so much with indie publishing. So issues of power and access and privilege along lines of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class. So there's
there's always politics there, and this politics of care. I really like that term. I was wondering if Nicole could talk a bit more about that. The care engaged in the romance community, or women reading and writing stories, reading each other's stories, the limitations of that we've seen in organizations like Romance Writers of America. If I don't know, it's very evocative for me as a concept of the politics of care. Something that someone does for themselves when they're writing, something one does when one is reading, can be a way to create a space of care for oneself. And there's something very radical about that also.
I tell my advisors this because they did not like this part of my dissertation. So
really, I love it. I think it's very evocative. It's got me thinking a lot. And thinking about art as activism in and of itself, and self-care as a form of really radical activism from a certain perspective. And that's what I was thinking about. And from one perspective, whatever makes a woman happy in a world that has not traditionally tended to the happiness of women, there's something very radical about that.
I think just for me, again, my advisors did not like this part of my dissertation, so I spend a whole bunch of time thinking about it and never talking about it. But I think for me, all of my work is Black-centered and intra-community. So I'm very interested in the ways in which Black people identify their activism and their activist work as community care, right? And so sort of moving that to romance, I think there are lots of ways you can engage in that. I think, and it really depends on who you're sort of thinking about. So I think one of the things you might consider, or that is not my focus, but someone might consider, are the ways in which Black romance authors, or authors of romance who are Black, are providing a kind of community care for one another, right? So a lot of the work that, for instance, RWA, the support that RWA was not giving them, they were giving to one another, right? I think you consider readers in a very similar fashion, right? Sort of if you're looking for books by Black authors, or, you know, that feature Black romance, the place to go is usually not the most popular blog. It isn't your library, but it is another Black reader, right? So you could consider that part of it. And I think in terms of the romance novels, which is the part that I'm interested in, are thinking about the ways in which various authors present love and care as central to the stories that they're telling, right? So as Piper said, of course, there is a sort of Prince Charming of the 1950s or of 1897 for Black girls, and they were usually Black men, right? And you know that that is the case because you have another generation, right? Which is the same argument that historians make about the position of Black families during slavery, right? Yeah. You know that there are instances of love and care, not just even because a new generation exists, but because they live to see adulthood, right? That is an expression of community care. And so I'm interested in the ways in which Black romance authors, and Black romance in particular, sort of upend the kind of individual sort of couple relationship of a lot of romances, to sort of think not even just about, and I really hesitate to use found family because I think that can go many different ways, but to think about a larger community, right? And that can look very traditional in the sense of like a friend, a group, or like, you know, whatever, a series of brothers who all find love or something like that, right? But that can also be the sort of larger frame of like having grandparents, having like community members that you care for, right? These are features of African-American life, of sort of Black diasporic life. And I think you see them in more frequency and in different ways in romance authors and books by Black romance authors. And so for me, that is a sort of community of care that is then, especially in the genre of romance, then political because of the ways that it pushes and pulls at the genre itself.
Well, there's been some discussion on the chat, and actually some of the panelists have answered some of the questions. So thanks, I didn't want to interrupt, but there's one question, I think it was addressed to Jayshree at the beginning, and if I can find it, yeah, it's from Courtney Wetzel, and says, have you followed up recasting of the Bridgerton series and the Twitter social conversation around it, and how that relates to the historical representation of London? I think that's maybe for you, Jayashu.
Courtney, I haven't, and since we know each other IRL, we should probably do a watch party when the new Bridgertons actually comes out. But I do, I am aware that there was a lot of Twitter reaction and people had objections to the ethnicity or race of some of the actors that were chosen, because the original series, of course, is very white. And so I guess that's part of what I'm sort of working off of, right? This idea that certain groups have within the romance reader community that there is a particular vision, and we shouldn't mess with it because it's too politically correct to try to change anything about it, or certain things can only be represented by certain people. And so I'm trying to figure out what, how that's playing out within the written romance itself, but certainly other media, especially if this becomes a thing for romance novels to be turned into these shows. I imagine if this one works out, there will be more. How that actually works out in terms of adaptation, because adaptation is a slightly different thing than pure literary criticism and based in historical archival records or traced to. But the way that the actual visual representation is getting some pushback, I think kind of talks about the same seeds, right? I think it's the same resistance that you see in some of the readers as well. Yeah, so that'll be interesting. Does somebody know who the character and the actors that there was so much pushback about? Courtney, do you know?
Well, at least I know, at least for people, I don't know if anybody happens to belong in terms of Julia Quinn's Facebook groups or whatever. She's had to make quite the turn. And I don't know if it was a turn that she wanted to make, you know what I'm saying? A turn in terms of when her books were adapted and started to be cast with these people that the readers had not imagined, right? That the one dude played Chicken George in The Roots, I can't remember his Reginald or something, who was really, really hot dude, right? But he was not what Julia Quinn readers who, as an outcome of what was being discussed in that Facebook group, and you know, when I say friction and war, it really was like that. A lot of people had to get up and leave, and a lot of people were kicked out. Julia herself, like I said, has had to make quite a turn within the past few years, thinking about this particular issue of male heroes of color, particularly because that's what's going to be happening in the Bridgertons. Quite the turn. And like I said, it was not expected, but she's come up in terms of the defense of the ways in which, so something people in the chat are talking about who the Black actors are playing. Yeah, it's been a war. It really has been. Yeah.
Well, I think there's something interesting to think about. A lot of these adaptations, they have started to race bend, even in contemporaries. So that moment where you see a sort of trailer of like whatever, a New Lifetime or Hallmark movie, and then you go to buy the book, and it is a totally different world. Yeah. There needs to be an attention to that and sort of what's happening there and what it means, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, changing the topic a little bit, there's a message from Steve who suggests that in order to build on some of these discussions of community, I wonder if some of the panelists could talk about the role of paratext and genre, publishing history in the future of romance studies.
This is literally my favorite topic. I love talking about paratext. I'm kind of out there as a literary studies scholar in that I don't particularly like close reading as a methodology. I get quite frustrated with it because I often can't see what it does. This isn't to say that people don't do great close readings. I just haven't mastered the skill of doing one that does something. For me, the study of paratext does something. I'm so interested in what paratext, which for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, paratext is everything around a book that's not the story itself. So if we're talking about the object of the book, we're thinking about things like covers and blurbs and front matter, and if there are any ads in the back. If we look at old school romance novels, there's usually some wild like inserts in the middle and those fold out covers. Oh, so interesting. The paratext of Bills and Boone and Harlequin is really interesting as well because there are such clear markers of what it does. And paratext sets up, I think, the expectations of genre in a way that is a little bit underrated in scholarship. So if I picked up a book that was like all black and had a skull on the front and like red letters and was called like Murder and Death, and I opened it and it was a romance novel, even if it was a great romance novel, I'd be disappointed because I was clearly expecting crime. And so I think we really need to consider the role that paratext plays in communicating generic expectations. And I think in many ways, the study of paratext when we're talking about genre is a way in to the study of text, because the expectations that govern those texts are communicated by the paratext. And yeah, I can talk about this for a long time, so I won't monologue, but basically paratext is super important and I think we should all be studying it more.
I think that's really interesting, and I'm going to connect to two things. One, my own experience as a reader, and particularly the rise of the so-called rom-com, right? And the marketing and the covering of the rom-com. And oftentimes, though, I read them and I don't feel like it actually is a rom-com, right? And so there's a mismatch then between that paratextual apparatus and then the genre inside the book. And the second thing is that most of my current research on romance is like scholarship of teaching and learning. So I've done a lot of data gathering from my students. I teach a women in popular culture class, and I center it as romance is our popular artifact that we spend most of our time on. And my goal in this particular class, because it's a gender studies class, is to use romance to teach them the concepts like social construction of gender, systems of privilege and oppression, things like that. And the results of that are all kinds of muddy. But one thing that I'm doing is I revamped the class for online versions because of pandemic and everything else, is I'm adding in more pieces of studying that paratext. And I'm really interested to see how students might actually end up responding to the stories themselves differently because I've framed it in a different way. So I don't have IRB approval for this next iteration, which includes this new approach, but I'm really curious to see if studying that more intently for the students helps them in any way or complicates things. But it's a really fascinating thing, and I'm glad that I'm kind of making that turn, and I'm going to follow up with you, Jody.
I think it's quite interesting, Jody, and I didn't know that's what it was. But if we look at this book, which is the Nolly books, and it's mainly 18 to 24, one of the things that the publisher Moki Makura said, it was mainly to encourage young people to read more. The book is small because most people use public means, so it's small enough for them to put in their handbag. But at the end of the book, she created and she patented this. It's called a book zine. And at the end, in this book zine, it has lots of different ways. So for example, it has talking points, encouraging people to engage with the text even more. And then at the end, it has a word power, kind of like a dictionary. What have you learned from this text? What words have you learned from this text? And then it has word quizzes, and then it has a word pattern. So it has all sorts of different things. And then it always ends with one of South African celebrities, in a way saying to whoever is reading this book, celebrities read. So if they read, you can read this book. So I think I'll also contact you later because I'm interested also in the paratext of the text itself.
Yeah, I will talk to anyone who wants to about paratext for an embarrassingly long time. Like, just putting that out there now, I will talk your ear off about this. But I think it's really interesting thing to study, particularly when we consider the logics of genre that those paratexts communicate. So, for instance, Lisa Fletcher and I from the University of Tasmania have been doing some thinking around what the paratext of Harlequin and Mills and Boon communicates. And often these are kind of positioned in, you know, mainstream thinking as kind of like the bottom rung, as the, you know, scare quotes, trashiest, because their paratext communicates that you get a similar, a reproducible experience again and again and again and again. Where I think we run into trouble is when we place like value systems on that, when we assume that that reproducibility is necessarily a bad thing, when really it's just a different thing to a logic of rereadability. And so and I think romance paratexts in particular are so rich, and thinking about what they communicate to the reader who is an insider in the genre, who understands the genre, they can gain so much from that paratext before they even open the book. And unpacking that, particularly in the age of digital publishing, where readers are doing so much of their buying on spaces like Amazon, where they're using Goodreads, where they're using StoryGraph, thinking about the role that that paratext plays in connecting text to reader is so vital.
Something I've never understood is why in romance you get those covers that then embarrass the readers to read them in public.
Well, I think that's when paratext really entered the debate. Was around 50 Shades of Grey, and how people could read it on an e-reader, so that paratext wasn't visible, because that communicated something.
I wanted to shift gears. There was
Maria, can I have this one little intervention? In the chat, I've just put in a plug for an upcoming book that Shuming, Eric, and I edited, and that has a chapter from my dissertation that hopefully is a little bit better than it was in the dissertation. That's on paratext, and I essentially review the history of paratext in romance, going back to like magazines that published romances and had illustrations in them, and it simultaneously like review the history of the shaming that's attached to the paratext, especially the way it's represented in media. So how you'll find like sitcoms that have an episode that's devoted to making fun of romance novels based basically on the paratext, or you'll have movies that do the same, and so on. And sometimes within the literary form itself, other people will make fun of it. So I've just put our book there. I think it comes out in August. So.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think one kind of final button on that is if you want an example of how important paratext is, look at the way that Fabio has haunted romance discourse. And he comes straight from paratext.
Yeah. I wanted to shift gears to some other comment that Jasri included here. For my fellow panelists and others, what are the places to boost the status of romance scholarship, including funding? And I would like to relate that to something Jessica mentioned in her preliminary video about who gets access to that scholarship. Going back to this, what for? What, you know, we are talking about all these fascinating topics, and I would like to have 20 hours, and we wouldn't even just scratching the surface of all these topics. But I would like to see, you know, what's the way of maybe raising the status or respect of this type of scholarship, how to get any help, and also how to reach a wider audience than just scholars talking to each other. So
I don't know, there's a question in the chat.
We're just going to go to this question first, Isabel, and then...
No, but it's related. I think it's related because you're mentioning the question of funding, or Jayashri mentioned the question of funding. And there's Madeleine here that wants to hear more about self-publishing in the romance genre. What is the status of it in the genre and how it has been influencing its development? Is there specific potential for self-publishing in the romance genre as it is often so firmly rooted in fan communities? Well, I think it's kind of related in a way. So maybe we can discuss.
If I could address a little bit of that, this issue of the future of romance scholarship and the funding. One thing that I really like about the field of popular romance studies is how very interdisciplinary it is. And I think that's a huge strength of the field, and going forward, continuing to push interdisciplinary connections is a very fruitful avenue for continuing to grow the field, grow connections to other fields, seek funding sources and make connections. So like even just here today, we have people from history, from literary perspectives, sociology, psychology, gender, sexuality, queer theory. It's an incredibly, we've been talking about sort of the political relevance of so many of the stories and the acts of writing and reading. It's just a field that allows one to reach out in a lot of different academic directions and make connections. It's a very integrative, interdisciplinary field in that way. So I think that's a huge strength of the field, something to push going forward, and it becomes an avenue for funding also, in that one can seek through a lot of different professional organizations and national funding organizations connections for funding, for directing resources toward future scholarship. And the part of how that's worked for me has been through making international collaborative connections also. So like this organization itself, the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance, has gathered scholars from around the world. So not only all these different disciplines that I just talked about, but we've got people here from Australia and Africa and Europe and North and South America. So very integrative in that way too. And specifically talking about funding, universities like to make connections. It's part of what they're supposed to do, making international collaborative partnerships. There's often funding for that. So here I brought a book to show you. This is a new book that's just coming out now, just got published from University of Edinburgh Press, Love Across the Atlantic, US-UK Romance in Popular Culture. And it stemmed from, the beginning of it was from this conference, the International Association for the Popular Romance, when it was in Thessaloniki, Greece a few years ago. And Deborah German was our keynote speaker, and she's a professor in England, and I met her at the Greek conference, and many collaborations ensued from that led to an international partnership between her university, Roehampton, which is in London, and mine, the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And we brought her over for an international residency for a week, and she hosted a lot of people at an international conference in London at her university, and eventually this book came out of it. And a lot of that was funded by our universities, Roehampton and University of Alabama, which put money into creating this international partnership with the hope that research would come out of it. And it did. So I think those are positive directions to stress the interdisciplinary aspect of the field, to stress the international aspect of the field, to use it as a way to build institutional partnerships and individual partnerships, and like the snowball effect of one thing leading to another in terms of both funding and publications and pushing conversations forward in productive ways.
Sure.
Yeah, another thing that I think the interdisciplinary aspect has definitely been helpful for me and my current university, University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, was founded in the 60s as kind of a hippie interdisciplinary institution. So I get a lot of support from my institution, I think because of our identity, and I know not everyone has that. But the other thing I would add is that while I really love going to conferences in person, I also think that the virtual opportunities that the pandemic has forced us to have been Also increasing access, right? I'm thinking about like even this week of programming that our association is having is something that's probably going to be more accessible to more people, right? For a variety of reasons, right? Whether they feel like maybe they wouldn't go to a scholarly conference, or for me, like I just wouldn't be able to get enough funding to go to a conference that's far away, right? So I think those are kind of questions of access, like how can we sort of create these scholarly communities, and have, sometimes there's benefit in having conversations amongst scholars, but also how can we leverage those conversations and put them out for a broader audience so that more people can benefit, and you know, then they're going to reach out, and there might be more opportunities for scholars to appear on podcasts. I was just listening to Nicole's appearance on podcast the other day, and just loving learning about her research through that venue, right? In addition to being able to read traditionally scholarly articles. So I see a real possibility in that, and also some of these things that bypass traditional funding and resource structures, right? That also make them more accessible for more scholars to get their voices heard, and sometimes by a wider audience. And I think that's really valuable.
We are supposed to finish in 4 minutes.
Oh my God.
Now, if people want to continue for a little bit longer, that would be okay with me. But what I would like to ask, especially for those who have to leave, is if each of the panelists could just think about one sentence, one final thought or message they would like to share with the rest of us. We could do it maybe alphabetically if you want. Nicole?
Oh, okay. I was just thinking I'm not particularly brief, so yeah, start with me. I think the thing I'm most interested in is, and someone mentioned something, well, this isn't going to be brief, I'm sorry. I think the thing I'm most interested in, someone talked about sort of academic texts being inaccessible to the everyday romance reader. And I actually would argue that's probably not true. I would like to see a sort of elevation of the sort of critical engagement of the romance reader and with the scholarship and with the books they read, so that romance can be taken seriously in a way not just by the Academy, but by readers, authors, and publishers themselves.
Okay, thank you. And I'm even terrible at that. Alphabetically, Piper was supposed to go first.
Yeah, it's good that she went first, because I know what I was going to say. But so, you know, I'm just more about inclusion and expansion of these ideas and places, even in these academic contexts. And I hope that we continue to push for that.
Thank you, Jasri.
I'll just say, to go back to your sort of original question behind the panel, why does romance scholarship matter? I think it matters because romance matters. It matters because it distills some of the key and core ideas that we struggle with and want throughout our lives. And so we have to take a critical look at why those things are what they are.
Thanks. Jody?
I think what I've been thinking about a lot recently is that to study romance, and indeed to study any text from any genre, we also need to study how those texts are produced. I think the study of literature in many ways also has to be the study of publishing and the conditions that produce those texts.
Catherine?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Let me phrase it again, going back to the panel topic. Why does it matter? I think romance scholarship matters because telling stories matters. I'm very interested in narrative and the power of telling a story. So I'd say we need to all keep telling our stories. Writing is very powerful, a way to give voice. I think that's the lesson of the Me Too movement. the power of telling your story, the power of Black Lives Matters, of hashtag say her name. So to speak our stories, there's great power and transformative potential to that.
Linda?
I just want to, I think, echo what Catherine said. Romance matters, studying romance matters. And I think what has encouraged me is this platform, because I kind of sometimes feel very alone in what I do from where I'm located, because a lot of people think it's just, frivolous things. And to meet all of you who are talking about romance in a very, very engaging way has been, I think, quite an opportunity. And I'm glad that it's virtual and that we can have the next week to have these kinds of discussions.
Thanks. And Jessica?
Yeah, I guess one thing that has threaded through our conversation today and that I've been thinking about a lot, like, why does romance matter to me? Because it's about pleasure. And I think a lot of my academic life has been like, questioning pleasure or trying to focus on more serious topics, like a number of the panelists have said that they've faced in criticism of their work. And so I think that romance scholarship also is about highlighting pleasure, the pleasures of the text, the pleasure of readers, the pleasure of us as scholars getting to read these texts and getting to share these critical perspectives on them.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to just wrap things up. I want to mention that, as I said at the beginning, we had over 100 people registered for the conference from over 20 countries. And right now we are at the lowest level of 47 participants on this first roundtable. So I would like to again thank all the participants and Isabel for all her help. And so remember, actually, for me, it's going to be pretty much today because it's going to be at 3 a.m. The next roundtable is on global romance and diversity. And we'll have Brigitte Bautista, Minas Guerra, Sandra Foley, and Heike Misler. So that will be tomorrow, chaired by Amy Birch and Charlotte Ireland. This has been the Roundtable, Why Does It Matter? The Role of Romance Scholarship. Thank you for watching, and please check the rest of the conference that is forthcoming. Here is the information.